Jai Gurudev, Brahmaraji. If my internet, because it is still, there is an issue in audio.
I'll
If you
take
feel,
over, don't worry.
yeah, please let me know. Okay.
No problem.
Om. Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. Hari Om, Jai Gurudev. I will repeat both the shlokas and then I think 29th also I will repeat the shloka since they are very, very important. सर्वभूतस्थमात्मानं सर्वभूतानि चात्मनि ईक्षते योगयुक्तात्मा सर्वत्र समदर्शनः. One whose mind is resolved by this contemplation, who has the vision of sameness everywhere, sees the self abiding in all beings and all beings in the self. यो मां पश्यति सर्वत्र सर्वं च मयि पश्यति तस्याहं न प्रणश्यामि स च मे न प्रणश्यति. The one who sees me in all beings and sees all beings in me, for him or her I am not remote and he or she is not remote from me. I will just read a paragraph. The result of the vision, the one who is Samadarshi. And what is the result of this vision? Here Krishna uses the first person. Here the first person indicates that Krishna is talking as Ishvara. He says, for the person having this vision, I will not become remote. Tasya aham na pranashyami, meaning that I will no longer be something known only indirectly to the person. Why? Because Ishvara is Atma. I do not become an indirect object of worship that is sitting somewhere. I do not become someone who is away from the person because Ishvara is oneself, Atma. And not only that, the person also does not go away from me. Saha cha me na pranashyati. I do not become remote for the person and the person does not go away from me. This fact was already there, but previously the person did not know it and now he or she knows. This is not something that just happened because of some interference on the part of the Lord. It was true before and it is true now. All that has happened is that the person did not know it before and now he or she knows. The person now sees himself or herself in all beings and all beings in the self. A person of this vision never goes away from me, meaning there is no distance between me and the person. Neither does the person goes away from me, nor I go away from the person. I do not become remote for the person, and he or she does not become remote for me. This means that previously there was a certain remoteness, and Ishvara, Paramatma, was something that was sought after. Ishvara was someone whose grace was invoked, etc. Now, all the prayers and rituals have paid off. The payoff is the vision that between Jiva and Ishvara there is no difference. The difference is all resolved. This is what is meant here by the statement Tasya aham na pranashyami. I do not become something that is away for this person, nor is the person away from me. The Lord is usually presented as though he is behind a veil and that he can see us, but we cannot see him. Therefore, the Lord is someone who always seems to be looking into your private affairs. But here in this verse, Krishna is saying that the Lord has no veil or cover that prevents you from seeing him. Ignorance is the only veil there is, and that covering has already been removed. Therefore, there is no obstacle. There is only one vision, the vision of the Para Atma, the whole. Everything resolves into this one Atma alone. So, Sarvam Jagadidam Brahmamayare. That bhajan is so appropriate. I am everything. Elsewhere, Shankara says, in half a verse, I shall explain what has been said before by millions of words and text. Ardha shlokena pravakshyami yaduktam grantha kotibhi. And having already used one half of a verse to say this much, he completes the verse by saying Brahman is Satya and the whole world Jagat is Mithya. Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. And Jiva is non-separate from Brahman. Jiva Brahmaiva na aparaha. This means that the body, mind, and senses are also mithya. And the jiva, that is other than the physical body, mind, and senses, that is Atma, is Brahman. This means that I am everything. Idam sarvam aham asmi. This vision then is the vision that resolves the difference between the Jiva and Ishvara, which is why Ishvara is never remote from you, nor are you ever away from him. There is no difference other than what is caused by ignorance. Ignorance being removed, all that is there is one flame of consciousness in which everything exists, everything that is inquired into, everything that is not inquired into, the known and the unknown, all exist in Atma alone. The Atma of Ishvara and the Atma of the Jiva is one and the same Atma whose Swarupa is consciousness. This consciousness, this Atma alone is self-existent, the whole, which is Ishvara, which is the Jiva. So beautiful. Now I understand why Nanaji was saying that avyabhicharini bhakti means what? It is so beautiful, right? Anyone would like to share here, like, or you want me to repeat any paragraph? Please let me know before we go to the new verse. So we are all Purnatma and we are all that Sat Chit Anand, and that is the only Swarupa which is the truth. Everything else is Mithya. But Krishna continues, सर्वभूतस्थितं यो मां भजत्येकत्वमास्थितः सर्वथा वर्तमानोऽपि स योगी मयि वर्तते. यह, the one who, ekatvam, oneness, asthitah, having gained, sarva bhuta sthitam, abiding in all beings, mam, me, bhajati, gains the vision, sah yogi, that yogi, sarvatha, in whatever way, vartamanah, remaining, api, even, mai, in me, vartate, abides. यह एकत्वम आस्थितः सर्वभूतस्थितं मां भजति सह योगी सर्वथा वर्तमानः अपि मयि वर्तते. The one who gains the vision, having gained the oneness of me abiding in all beings, that yogi abides in me whatever he or she does. This verse continues to discuss the person who has the vision of the oneness of Atma in all beings, who knows that Atma is himself or herself alone and is therefore not separate from Ishvara. Such a person knows himself or herself to be Ishvara in fact. All this is restated here. Mama sarva bhutas sthitam yo bhajati. This refers to the one who gains the vision, that is the one who has this vision of Ishvara as that which abides in all beings. Therefore, the self is non-separate from Parmeshwara. The vision that is gained is in terms of the oneness of Atma, the oneness of Atma that is never divided, that is the undivided whole, and the one who recognizes Ishvara in this undivided form, Ekatvam Asthitaha, the one who gains this vision of Ishvara, that yogi, however he or she may live, remains with Ishvara. Sarvatha Vartamanah api Sahayogi Mai Vartate. Thus, Krishna says, the person remains in me alone. So this also we had seen yesterday. I will quickly read the paragraph. So Brahmaraji had rightly yesterday chanted that Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Meva Vashishyate. This verse answers the question of whether, having gained the vision, it can never be lost. I am often asked, Swamiji, suppose a person gains this vision, is it not possible that living in the day-to-day world of duality, the person can lose the Atma? No, Krishna says here, whatever the person does, whatever happens to the person, seeing, hearing, talking, walking, in whichever way he or she happens to live, whether as a brahmachari, a grihastha, or a sannyasi, whether a man or a woman, young or old, sarvatah, vartamanah api, the vision remains. The stage of life the person is in, or the profession he or she happens to be pursuing, is all because of the person's prarabdha. In fact, there is nothing wrong for the person and there is nothing right either. For the person who has the vision, Shastra is no longer applicable. Whatever the Shastra says with reference to Dharma and Adharma no longer applies to the person who is above Dharma and Adharma. This must be clearly understood. The person is free and therefore called Mukta, Nitya Mukta, one who is always free. This free person never goes away from me. Never again do I become remote for the person, because one can never be away from oneself. Even now, I am not away from the truth of myself. Sat Chit Ananda Atma. Only ignorance can keep me away, and for the person being discussed here, ignorance is gone. Therefore, wherever the person is, whatever he or she is doing, sarvatha vartamanaha api, the person remains in me, oneself alone. Mai vartate. There is no moving away from me for the person who is a jivan mukta. That is, leaving, the person is liberated. This liberation, moksha, is the phala, the result of this vision, this knowledge of Atma. When you believe in Ishvara, he is remote. The conclusion here then is that Ishvara is not something remote from oneself. Ishvara na parokshaha. Paroksha is what is inferred, believed, or presumed. You have a presumption that there is an Ishvara, which amounts to a belief because there is no verifiable proof. And as long as existence of Ishvara is simply a belief, Ishvara is remote, something that exists for you indirectly, that is paroksha, because it is a belief. Similarly, if you say that a tree exists, but you do not directly see it, it is paroksha. For example, by seeing smoke, you can assume there is fire, even though the fire is not directly seen by you. Any object whose existence is arrived at by you through inference is called paroksha, indirectly known for you. Whereas anything that is sensorily perceived, anything you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch is called pratyaksha. When I hold up a piece of crystal, knowing it is a crystal, it is pratyaksha for me. But for you, it will be paroksha if you do not know whether it is crystal or glass. You can infer it is crystal until you feel the weight of it, and then you will know. The point to be understood here is what is directly perceived is called pratyaksha, and what is indirectly arrived at is called paroksha. Ishvara cannot be pratyaksha. If Ishvara could be directly perceived, it would mean that he is other than yourself, anatma. Ishvara cannot be anatma because he can never be an object for you. Anatma is entirely dependent upon Chaitanya Atma. If Ishvara were to become Anatma, he would be Mithya, and you, being Atma, would become Satya. Because Ishvara cannot be Anatma, he can never become Pratyaksha, an object of your perception. Nor can he be inferred, inference being based on perception. Still, you believe that Ishvara exists, which means Ishvara is Paroksha. The person who believes that Ishvara exists is called an Astika, one who believes. And for the Astika, there is a pramana, a shastra, through which he or she comes to understand, comes to believe that Ishvara exists. And because you believe, you give validity to the means of knowledge, the shastra, even though what is said is not verifiable. Because some supporting logic is available, you accept that Ishvara exists, and this belief, this acceptance is paroksha jnana, indirect knowledge. Self-knowledge is immediate knowledge. But the knowledge being discussed in this verse is not paroksha jnana. The one who has gained the knowledge of Atma is the one who has gained the knowledge of oneself. Such a person concludes, I am everything. There is nothing separate from me. Here, when the Lord says me, what is implied is pure consciousness, Chaitanya, which is Param Brahma, Satya Jnana Ananta Atma Brahma. And everything else is dependent upon that. And this Satya Jnana Ananta Brahma is Atma, oneself. Because there is no difference between Ishvara, Brahman and myself. I never become Paroksha to him, nor does he become Paroksha to me. This is what we call Advaita, the non-difference, Abheda, between Ishvara and the Jiva. This identity between the Jiva and Ishvara, Jiva Ishvara Aikya, was pointed out in the previous verse also. Shankara also points out in his commentary of the previous verse that Atma never becomes Paroksha. Atma is always free, Nitya Mukta. There is no bondage for Atma because there is nothing other than oneself. Therefore, Krishna says, the person remains in me alone. Mai eva vartate. This means that one's ignorance is no longer there. There is no question of the knowledge being lost. Knowledge of oneself, Atma Gnana, is not memory based. Only knowledge that is memory based can be forgotten. Whatever you have, you can always lose. Memory is for me, Atma. Because memory is something I have, I can lose it. But here, what is known is myself alone. The self-ignorance I had before is gone in the wake of knowledge, wherein the self is equated with Brahman. Once gained, this knowledge is never lost. Unless Atma becomes Paroksha, there is no question of the wise person being away from me, and Atma can never become Paroksha because it is Nitya Aparoksha. It is always directly known by you. Whether you are a confused person, a discriminating person, or a jnani, Atma is never Paroksha. Samsara is directly known by the person. It is not something that is inferred. It is an experience for the person and therefore aparoksha. As samsari, ajnani, I am is aparoksha. And as a viveki, jnani also, I am is aparoksha. Therefore, Atma is nitya aparoksha, always self-evident. Being Nitya Aparoksha, Atma is Nitya Mukta, always liberated. Knowledge makes the person recognize the fact of being ever liberated. This is why the person is also called Jivan Mukta, living. Living, the person gains the knowledge that is liberation. Once this knowledge has been gained, let the person do whatever he wants, perform Vedic karma or not, teach or not teach. Let the person be in any stage of life and perform any action, he or she is still with me alone. Even for the sake of argument, if such a person were to commit murder, the person would not be away from me because he or she is not a doer. So till here we had seen yesterday. Now the next question, of course, is could such a person commit such actions? No, says Krishna in the next verse. Wrong action is not possible for the person. Atmaupamyena sarvatra samam pashyati Arjuna sukham va yadi va dukkham sayogi paramo matah. Arjuna, O Arjuna, yah, the one who, sarvatra, everywhere, sukham va, either pleasure, yadi va dukham, or pain, atma aupamyena, taking oneself as an example, basis, samam, the same, pashyati, sees, saha, that yogi, paramah, the most exalted, matah, is regarded. O Arjuna, yah sarvatra sukham va yadi va dukkham atma aupamyena samam pashyati sah yogi paramah matah. If one who, taking oneself as an example, basis in all situations, sees either pleasure or pain as the same, that yogi, O Arjuna, is regarded as the most exalted. I repeat, if one who, taking oneself as an example in all situations, sees either pleasure or pain as the same, that yogi, O Arjuna, is regarded as the most exalted. Here Krishna obviates the problem of whether the wise person can perform any action of adharma by showing that there is no way of his doing that. For such a person, Atma, oneself, is the upama, the example. The self itself becomes the example. Atma aupamyam. One who is oneself as an example sees that which is equal in all beings. Sarvatra samam pashyati, as being equal to oneself alone. The person does not look upon others from any other metrics except himself or herself alone. With reference to all beings, the vision is equal, the same. One looks upon others as oneself alone on the basis of the example of oneself. This is one meaning. There is also another meaning which we shall see later. In the second line of the verse, the vision of sameness is pointed out in terms of happiness and pain, sukham va dukkham va. My happiness, sukha, my welfare is highly desirable to me and therefore I go for it, which is the same for everyone. Every being is equally interested in its own sukha. Therefore, I become the matrix, the basis for my interaction with other beings. Similarly, dukkha is what is not desirable for me or for anyone else either. So the way I perceive sukham for myself, same way I perceive the sukha for the rest of the beings around me. And the dukkha, what I perceive as dukkha, which is not desirable for me, I know that it will be non-desirable for everybody else around me. If you want me to repeat anything, kindly let me know. The basis for Dharma. Brahmaji, I will have to go to the center. Kindly let me know when you can take over.
You can stop share. I will share.
Okay, Brahmaji. Dhanyavad.
Yeah. So, continuing. In the second line of the verse, the vision of sameness is pointed out in terms of happiness and pain. Sukham va dukkham va. My happiness, sukha, my welfare, is highly desirable to me and therefore I go for it, which is the same for everyone. Every being is equally interested in its own sukha. Therefore, I become the matrix, the basis for my interaction with other beings. Similarly, dukkha is what is not desirable for me or for anyone else either. The basis of dharma. Here you can see how dharma itself is born. The very basis of dharma is the universal mutual expectation of people. What I expect of others is what others expect of me. If what is desirable, sukha, for me is desirable for others, and what is undesirable, dukkha, for me is undesirable for others also, then there is a common basis, which is what is meant by dharma. Having the vision of sameness in all beings, then, the person discussed here does not do what is not desirable. Therefore, what Krishna said in the previous verse, whatever the person does, he or she remains in me. Sarvatha vartamanaha api mayi vartate is further explained here. What was said there could be misunderstood to mean that a jnani could do things that are adharma and yet he remains in Ishvara. Therefore, answering the question, will such a person do actions that are considered to be wrong, adharma? Krishna says no. It is not possible because what is good for the jnani is good for others too. And what is bad for the jnani is bad for others also. If the jnani does not like getting hurt, then he or she is not going to hurt anyone else. In this way, non-injury, ahimsa, becomes natural to the jnani. Even for a viveki, a simple, mature person, ahimsa is a very common dharma. And for a jnani, one who has lived a life of dharma and who has deliberately pursued and gained the knowledge, dharma becomes spontaneous, very natural. If you look at any crime, like hurting another person, or any kind of action considered to be adharma, behind it there is always a small ego. Every ego is small, in fact. A big ego is also small. Any ego being just a bubble filled with air. Whether the bubble is big or small, it is nothing but air. That is all there is to this ego business. Just so much air. Ego itself is a false entity, and this false entity is behind every crime, large or small. The nature of the ego. And what kind of ego is this? The ego of an insecure person, an insecure ego that has fear and greed. Because it has fear and greed, it is insecure. Because it is insecure, it is frightened. A frightened person or a greedy person can perform actions that are not very committed to dharma. In fact, all unbecoming actions stem from the insecure ego, and no ego is secure. Because the nature of ego is isolation, there is duality, dvaita. This is so very nice. I will repeat this one. Nature of the ego. And what kind of ego is this? The ego of an insecure person, an insecure ego that has fear and greed. Because it is fear and greed, it is insecure. Because it is insecure, it is frightened. A frightened person or a greedy person can perform actions that are not very committed to dharma. In fact, all unbecoming actions stem from the insecure ego, and no ego is secure. Because the nature of ego is isolation, there is duality, dvaita. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it is said that wherever there is duality, there will be fear. Dvitiyat vai bhayam bhavati. A similar statement is found in the Taittiriya Upanishad, conveying the same sense. Udaram antaram kurute asya tasya bhayam bhavati. Udaram antaram kurute athatasya bhayam bhavati. The original duality is the duality between the individual, Jiva, and the Ishvara, the Lord. Jiveshvara Dvaita, meaning that Ishvara is something other than myself. This Dvaita makes you small. If Ishvara is everything else, you become whatever is left out. Naturally, then, you become small. Everything else is infinitely large, and you are small. And once this original Dvaita is there is the Dvaita between one individual and another. Jiva Jiva Dvaita. And between the Jiva and the world, Jiva Jagat Dvaita. Now, if the duality between Jiva and between Jiva and Jagat is real, then the duality between Jiva and Ishvara is also real. Why? Because if the Jiva Jiva Dvaita and the Jiva Jagat Dvaita are real, there must be an Ishvara other than this Jagat. Then that Ishvara is just another guy, like any other Jiva. And between him and the other Jivas, including myself, there will be a difference. Also, between all these Anatmas and myself, there will be difference. All the way, then there is difference. There being Dvaita between the Jivas, the Jagat, and Ishvara. If there is Dvaita between the Jivas, between the Jiva and the Jagat, and between the Jagat and Ishvara, if there is Dvaita between these three, then your isolation is established, mortality is established, imperfection is established, inadequacy is established, all of which are accompanied by fear, greed, pain, sorrow, etc. So beautifully, Swamiji has derived this, the basis of fear, the basis of the difference of duality. Do you want me to read this one more time? So we'll read further. Ego is ignorance-based. Since ego implies isolation, behind every crime there is ego. But the yogi, Krishna, is talking about is the one who has pricked the bubble of this ego. The bubble ego is no longer there. One ocean alone is there. Ego is ignorance-based, ignorance of Atma. Once the ignorance of Atma is gone, all that remains is one Atma, which is Param Brahma. There is no ego anymore. And when the ego is not there, where is the question of the person doing anything improper? The person abides in Ishvara alone. Mayi eva vartate. But for the sake of argument, you can say that the person can do anything he or she likes. Even though the person still does various things, whatever these may be, or however they are done, the person remains in me alone. This is Shastra. When the Lord says remaining in me alone, it means that the person is never separate from him. In other words, the person and the Lord are one and the same. A person who has this equal vision everywhere has no necessity to do things that are not in keeping with dharma. The person naturally sees that what is sukha for him or her is also sukha for others, and what is dukkha for him or her is dukkha for other people as well. But will the person who has this vision not compromise it in any way? After all, most people understand that what makes them happy or unhappy affects others in the same way, but still they do not always behave according to dharma. Suppose something becomes so important to this person, is it not possible that the vision will be set aside temporarily at least? In fact, this problem will not arise because for the person who has this vision, there is no notion that I am limited. There is knowledge that the same Atma is in all beings, and all beings are in oneself, Atma alone. The ego for this person is bhadita, sublated. It is no more taken as real. Therefore, this person is one for whom ahimsa is natural, which is in fact the spirit of sannyasa. A person who has this clear vision of Atma, samyak darshana nishtha, who is naturally, spontaneously given to ahimsa, who no longer needs to practice ahimsa deliberately because it is his or her very nature, is described here as the most exalted Parama among yogis. There is a second interpretation of the verse, but before that, I think we'll just summarize this interpretation. So what Swamiji is here saying is that the basis of dharma, the original question was, since this person, whatever he does, this Atmanishta, the Jnana Nishta, whatever he does, he's above dharma and adharma, right and wrong. But does that mean, and then Swamiji puts on the thing that even if he does a crime, he is not affected. But he says, does he actually commit criminal deeds? The answer is an emphatic no. Why? Krishna explains. That is the beautiful verse which says, Atmau pamyena sarvatra samam pashyati yorjuna sukham va yadi va dukkham sayogi paramo mataha. So taking himself as an example, if one who, taking oneself as an example, basis in all situations, sees either pleasure or pain as the same, that yogi, O Arjuna, is regarded as the most exalted. So for him, he's already lived a life of dharma, and for him the ego is sublated, it is sublimated. So only when the ego is there, there is this notion of separation. There's isolation is there. And when there is isolation, there is fear and greed. And out of this fear and greed, a person can commit adharmic acts in order to protect himself. Whereas this person does not have an ego. He feels belong to everyone. He has that connect with everyone. So what is dharmic for him? What brings him sukha? He will consider the same for everybody else. So there is no way he will commit any crime. For him, ahimsa is very natural. There is no way he can do an adharmic act. And Swamiji very beautifully described the nature of the ego. The primordial difference, the Dvaita is the Jiva Ishvara Dvaita. And because of this, because you feel limited, there is this Jiva Dvaita. Then there is difference between you, me, them. There is that difference. And there is the difference between Jiva and Jagat. Jiva Jagat Dvaita. But for him,
Jai
yes.
Gurudev,
Yes.
can you elaborate the line mentioned, because the nature of ego is isolation? Can you elaborate this, how isolation is related to ego?
Ego is, I'll just go to that verse, that paragraph. Ego is a sense of separation, right? So when you feel separate from others, you are isolating yourself from them, isn't it?
Okay.
See,
yeah, the first paragraph.
First paragraph, right? The nature of ego. And what kind of ego is this? See, if you look at any crime, like hurting another person or any kind of action considered to be adharma, behind it, there is always a small ego. Every ego is small, in fact. A big ego is also small. Any ego being just a bubble filled with air. Whether the bubble is big or small, it is nothing but air. Thus, it is all there is to this ego business. Just so much air. That is why they say that person has put on a lot of air when a person is egoistic. So that means he has a big bubble filled with air. Ego itself is a false entity, and this false entity is behind every crime, large or small. The nature of the ego. And what kind of ego is this? The ego of an insecure person, an insecure ego that has fear and greed. Because it has fear and greed, it is insecure. Because it is insecure, it is frightened. A frightened person or a greedy person can perform actions that are not very committed to dharma. In fact, all unbecoming actions stem from the insecure ego, and no ego is secure. Because the nature of ego is isolation, there is duality, dvaita. Because you see yourself as separate, from the other person. That is the ego. When a person does not have ego, he feels one with everybody. There is no sense of separation there. So when everything is one, there is no question of fear or greed. Only when you see yourself separate from another, does insecurity happen, you feel isolated. The example that we normally give in our courses is that when you go to a party, when everybody else, your friend has invited you to a party, and everybody else out there is a stranger to you, your friend is the only one that you know. The moment you enter the room, you suddenly feel very isolated, you feel alone, and you're looking for that friend of yours to feel comfortable, isn't it? That is because of your ego. You feel that sense of separation. But if you, on the other hand, were at ease with yourself and you're coming from a space of no ego, no matter who is there, you will feel comfortable. You will feel at ease. There is no fear. There is no isolation. There is no insecurity. Which is why in the Brihadaranyaka it is said that wherever there is duality, there will be fear. Dvitiyat vai bhayam bhavati. These are beautiful verses to just remember, the statements to remember. And in Taittiriya Upanishad, udaram antaram kurute athatasya bhayam bhavati. Antaram is that difference. So the original duality is the duality between the individual Jiva and the Ishvara, the Lord. Jiveshwara Dvaita. Meaning that Ishvara is something other than myself. This Dvaita makes you small. See, this Dvaita we have as a karma yogi. But then I just go further. If Ishvara is everything else, you become whatever is left out. Naturally, then you become small. Everything else is infinitely large and you are small. And once this original Dvaita is there is the Dvaita between one individual and another. Jiva Dvaita. And between the Jiva and the world, Jiva Jagat Dvaita. And it just occurred to me that the importance of seva over here. When you do seva, you're minimizing, you're dissolving this Jiva Dvaita. Why do you go out and reach out and help the other person? The other person is in trouble, is in some difficulty. You feel that belongingness with that person and you want to relieve him of his difficulty. Therefore, you go out and reach and serve him. So you are kind of dissolving that Jiva Dvaita. And when you do something for the environment, for the world outside, you're also sublimating the Jiva Jagat Dvaita. That is why Gurudev has said, consider the whole earth as a living organism. And it is not like you consider a tree and the earth and water and air as something different from you. They are as much part of you as you are an organism. So when we function in this world, sublimating the Jiva Dvaita and the Jiva Jagat Dvaita, as karma yogis, we are left with only the Jiva Ishvara Dvaita, which is why we consider everything as a yajna. We offer everything to the Lord. And whatever the result is, we take it as prasada. Ultimately, once your mind and your antakarana shuddhi happens and you get that antakarana naischalya, when knowledge takes place, then even this Jiva Ishvara Dvaita is sublimated and you become one. You are nothing but Ishvara then. Anyone wants to say anything before I go to the ego is ignorance based? Nothing. We finished.
Ego like when you leave your ego, then it will also help in developing the samdarshana and samatva bhav. Correct. Also.
Right. That very right. That is why, see, Gurudev is as comfortable with people in the villages as he is with talking to scientists and all. Because he's coming from the space of no ego. And he's comfortable wearing what he's wearing. He does not change his attire because of the situation. He does not wear a suit and all that when he goes to the UN or to any other meetings. He is very comfortable in his skin, in his whatever he is. So shall we continue? Unless anyone wants to say anything. Otherwise, we'll go further. So the spirit of sannyasa, if you remember, has ahimsa. The ahimsa is natural to him. For him, it is very spontaneous, and he gives abhaya. He protects everyone. So nobody needs fear a sannyasi. He's coming from that space of ahimsa. So a person who has this clear vision of Atma, samyak darshana nishtha, who is naturally, spontaneously given to ahimsa, who no longer needs to practice ahimsa deliberately because it is his or her very nature, is described here as the most exalted parama among yogis. Therefore, this is the answer to the question of whether this person, can he commit a crime? Absolutely not. He does not commit any crime. A second interpretation of the verse. Just give me a minute, I'll get my charger. We can look at this verse in another way using the option offered by the word va as or, by adding this va or to sukha and dukkha. Sukham va yadi va dukkham. Here, situations are categorized in a twofold way. Those producing sukha and those producing dukkha, both of which the wise person looks at equally. Samam pashyati. This means that for the person, sukha and dukkha are the same. Why? Because he or she looks at them both with the example of himself or herself alone. Atma being the example, the basis of measurement, the matrix of judgment, the person sees that which is equal in both sukha and dukkha. How is this possible? Because the person understands the nature of Atma as fullness, wholeness, and from this basis, he or she looks at Sukha and Dukkha. Both are within that fullness alone. This does not mean that the person does not meet with situations producing Sukha and Dukkha. The point being made here is that the person looks at all situations, even the Dukkha of death, from the basis of Atma alone. Because the person knows oneself, Atma, as fullness, there is no ripple of reaction, whatever the situation. To put it in another way, when Sukha comes, the person's fullness does not increase, and when Dukkha comes, the fullness does not decrease, meaning that the person is always with Ishvara, Mayi eva vartate. There is no situation which is going to take the person away from Ishvara. This is the connection with the previous verse where it was said, whatever the person does, sarvatha vartamanaha api. There is no question of the person being away from me, Ishvara, or forgetting me, Ishvara, because of any situation involving dukkha, or sukha. Why? Because Atma is the example, the basis, upama, for the person, the Atma that is aham, I. I will read this one more time, but let me just complete this. Previously, it was pointed out that Atma is Parameshwara, Paramatma. Therefore, Paramatma is the upama, the example for the person who comes to bear upon all situations within the fullness that is the nature of Atma. This particular interpretation is in keeping with the example of the river and the ocean in the second chapter of the Gita. I will just read this part one more time. The second interpretation of the verse. We can look at this verse in another way using the option offered by the word va as or, by adding this va to sukha and dukkha. Sukham va yadi va dukkham. Here, situations are categorized in a twofold way. Those producing sukha and those producing dukkha, both of which the wise person looks at equally, samam pashyati. This means that for the person, sukha and dukkha are the same. Why? Because he or she looks at them both with the example of himself or herself alone. Atma being the example, the basis of measurement, the matrix of judgment, the person sees that which is equal in both Sukha and Dukkha. How is this possible? Because the person understands the nature of Atma as fullness, wholeness, and from this basis, he or she looks at Sukha and Dukkha. Both are within that fullness alone. This does not mean that the person does not meet with situations producing Sukha and Dukkha. The point being made here is that the person looks at all situations, even the Dukkha of death, from the basis of Atma alone. Because the person knows oneself, Atma as fullness, there is no ripple of reaction, whatever the situation. To put it in another way, when Sukha comes, the person's fullness does not increase, and when Dukkha comes, the fullness does not decrease, meaning that the person is always with Ishvara. Mayi eva vartate. There is no situation which is going to take the person away from Ishvara. This is the connection with the previous verse where it was said, whatever the person does, sarvata vartamanaha api. There is no question of the person being away from me, Ishvara, or forgetting me, Ishvara, because of any situation involving dukkha or sukha. Why? Because Atma is the example, the basis, upama for the person, the Atma that is aham, I. Previously, it was pointed out that Atma is Parameshwara, Paramatma. Therefore, Paramatma is the upama, the example for the person who comes to bear upon all situations with the fullness that is the nature of Atma. This particular interpretation is in keeping with the example of the river and ocean in the second chapter of the Gita. And the verse says, what is this verse? Apuryamānamacala pratishtham samudramāpah pravishanti yadvat tadvat kāmayam pravishanti sarve sashanti mapnoti na kāmakāmi. Apuryamāna means fullness, that which is completely filled from all sides, like the ocean, samudra. Achala means that the ocean remains in its own glory and does not move around. Pratishta is that which is well rooted, meaning the ocean is well rooted in its own glory. And into this ocean, waters enter, apah pravishanti, from different directions. Is the ocean affected in any way by this event? Does the oceanness increase? No. And if no waters enter for a time because of drought, etc., the oceanness also does not decrease. Oceans do not dry up, nor do they overflow. Such situations simply do not occur. Such a beautiful example of the ocean. And just going to read. I think I will just read up till the next verse, and then we can do Manana. Fullness depends on nothing. This example is a good one in terms of the fullness that is the nature of Atma. The example that holds water, in other words. Earlier it was ego and air, and here it is water. Water is fullness. Whether the waters enter or do not enter, the ocean always remains the same. It is always oceanness because oceanness does not depend upon any other source of water to be ocean. Similarly here, the ego, a wise person who is Ananta, does not depend for his or her fullness upon a given situation. Whatever happens, Sukha or Dukkha, the person sees them both equally. Therefore, he or she remains tranquil. Sashantim apnoti. Whatever objects kamas enter from whatever direction through the gates of the five sense organs, they do not disturb the person at all, just as the ocean is not disturbed by the waters. Whereas the person who is a desirer of various objects, kama kami, who is dependent upon their presence or absence for his or her happiness, is likened to a pond. If too much water comes in the form of rain or floods, you do not see the pond at all. And if there is no rain, it dries up altogether. Similarly, the kama kami is like a yo-yo. If something desirable comes along, he or she goes up. And if it is something undesirable, the person goes down. However, for the yogi discussed here, there is no yo-yo because he or she remains with me, the self alone. Whatever the tragedy, even if it meets the classical orthodox definition of a genuine tragedy, the person remains the same. This is the yogi Krishna is discussing here in keeping with the previous verse. Thus, there are two interpretations possible here. The yogi remains the same in any situation, whether it is sukha or dukkha, and the yogi looks upon others as he or she looks upon himself or herself. This being so, the person will not perform a wrong action. To treat others as you would have them treat you is applicable to everyone, in fact. Every human being is supposed to live this way. What to talk of a yogi? To hurt others is to be hurt in the process. No one can hurt another without getting hurt in the process, even though it may sometimes seem to be otherwise. We see this even in tennis matches. You begin with love and then you fight to win. And when you do win, you are ecstatic. On the way to the net to shake hands with your opponent, you jump up and down and throw your racket into the air. You are very happy until you see the other person's sadness in having lost. Then all your joy goes. Do you know why? Because no human heart was ever made that cannot empathize with a person who is sad. You know what it is to be on the other side of the net because you too have had days like that. Therefore, you cannot but pick up the other person's sadness immediately. Why? Because you can never hurt another without getting hurt in the process. It is just not possible. We think that there are criminals who have so hardened their hearts that they can automatically do harm to others. But this is not true. Even psychopaths have their spells of empathy because of how the human heart is. Swamiji is saying there's no one can hurt another without being hurt in the process. Insecurity is the problem. That you cannot hurt another without being hurt in the process is a fact, for which there is a very simple rule. All human beings must follow what we call the order of dharma. This is the common basis for everyone, although it is not commonly pursued because of a fundamental insecurity. This fundamental insecurity is the human problem. The insecure person acts in unbecoming ways because there are priorities for the person based on likes and dislikes. Wherever these priorities are, there will be confusion in terms of values unless the person frees himself or herself from the sense of being small. The person who does this sees the sameness in all beings always. Sarvatra samam pashyati. It is very clear to such a person that whatever is good for himself or herself is good for others also. This then is the yogi whom Krishna praises here. Even a mature person who tries to follow dharma will breach it now and again because some priority or other will always be there. Thus, you find that there is legitimate criticism, legitimate hurting, because you cannot always take the hurt. Sometimes you will hurt back. And this is considered to be legitimate in human interaction. Only a jnani is able to view sukha or dukkha in the same manner, and therefore only a jnani can be free. This is why, with reference to all people, he or she is considered to be the most exalted. Sa yogi paramo mataha. I will read this para again. Even a mature person who tries to follow dharma will breach it now and again because some priority or other will always be there. Thus, you find that there is legitimate criticism, legitimate hurting. Because you cannot always take the hurt, sometimes you will hurt back. And this is considered to be legitimate in human interaction. Only a jnani is able to view sukha or dukkha in the same manner, and therefore only a jnani can be free. This is why, with reference to all people, he or she is considered to be the most exalted. Sa yogi paramo mataha. Thus, we have these two ways of looking at the verse. The first in keeping with the Shastra, and the other in terms of behavior. One refers to the vision of the person, and the other is expression in one's interaction. Thus, this much having been said, the topic of dhyana yoga, meditation, contemplation is complete. In fact, Krishna has actually covered the topic twice in two different ways. Thinking that he had done a good job, Krishna may have sat back a bit. Seeing that Krishna had finished, Arjuna thinks it is a good time to ask a question, and does so in the next two verses. These verses make the nature of Arjuna's problem very clear. So I think we'll stop here. If anyone wants me to repeat anything before we start Manana, just let me know. Otherwise, I will just read the shloka once again. Atmaupamyena sarvatra samam pashyati Arjuna sukham va yadi va dukkham sayogi paramo mataha. If one who, taking oneself as an example, bases in all situations, sees either pleasure or pain as the same, that yogi, O Arjuna, is regarded as the most exalted. Yeah, we've seen all of this, the basis of dharma, the nature of the ego. Ego is ignorance based. And then the second interpretation of the verse. The first was based on Shastra, based on the ego, the jiva, the dvaita and advaita bhav. The second interpretation was based on the sukha dukkha, the behavior of a person. And this beautiful verse from the second chapter. Apuryamanamachala pratishtam samudramapah pravishanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravishanti sarve sashanti mapnoti na kamakami. Yeah, so maybe we'll, and this fullness does depend on nothing. To hurt others is to be hurt in the process. Insecurity is the problem. Yeah. So let's close our eyes and just reflect upon what we learned. Jai Gurudev. You can share your reflections. The natural conclusion when we say that this person is above dharma and adharma is that he might do actions which are adharmic. He might commit a crime, but it is not possible at all. And the two interpretations that are given in the verse re-emphasize this. The first interpretation is that he sees everyone in himself, that samam pashyati. He has that samadarsha bhava, where there is no jiva dvaita, there is no jiva jagat dvaita, there is not even jiva ishvara dvaita there. He merges with Ishvara. So there is only one. So when there is only one, it is like you cannot hurt your right hand with your left hand because you consider yourself as whole. This is for us, for you and me. But for the jnani, the whole, there is only one. There is no two. And when there is no two, there cannot be fear. There cannot be greed. Those beautiful verses from statements from Brihadaranyaka and Taittiriya Upanishad. Dvitiyam vat bhayam bhavati. And then udaramantaram kurute tasya bhayam bhavati. So only when there is that difference, only when there is that dvaita bhava, that separation, that you feel fear and greed, and therefore out of your priorities you would commit crime. Whereas dharma, the basis of dharma is that you see, you do unto others what you want them to do to you. You do not want others to hurt you, so you do not hurt them. So therefore, a person automatically is dharmic. He is in fact a dharmic person, and only then he becomes a jnani. An adharmic person can never come to this path even, isn't it? Only a matured person comes to this path. Whereas for the other second interpretation of the verse is that whether it is pleasure or pain, it is not like the jnani does not have sukha and dukkha in his life. Based on his prarabdha, he takes on whichever profession he's in. He continues in that. He might be a grahastha, he might be a sannyasi, he might be a brahmachari. But whenever he's faced with sukha and dukkha producing situations, he remains still, just like the ocean. He does not get overly elated, neither does he get flattened or depressed. So for him, when all situations are the same, then there is no need for him to do anything else in order to gain sukha dukkha. So there is no question of him doing any adharmic act because he himself is so full. It is only for a kama kami, for a person who has this limitation, who has these desires, he wants to in order to feel complete, because he feels insecure, in order to feel secure, he goes out there and has his priorities based on his likes and dislikes. Whereas for a mature person, a dharmic person, it is dharma that will guide him in his actions. It is not his likes and dislikes. But what I did not quite understand, if someone can throw some light, was that legitimate criticism and legitimate, what was that? Legitimate
hurting. I also did not follow
yeah,
this.
I did not quite
hurt.
understand that. If someone can throw some light on that.
It's like justifying your act yourself.
Yeah, where was that?
It's the last insecurity is the problem. The last.
Insecurity is the problem, right?
Yeah, second para.
Second paragraph.
Even a mature person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even a mature person who tries to follow dharma will breach it now and again, because some priority or other will always be there. Thus, you find that there is legitimate criticism, legitimate hurting. Because you cannot always take the hurt, sometimes you will hurt back. And this is considered to be legitimate in human interaction. So I didn't quite understand, is Swamiji saying this is all right for even for a mature person?
I think here Gurudev says, no, educate the person and let go. That's what it comes into the picture. Means
But
no need to be
no,
goody everywhere.
Huh.
The comparison is with a Jnani thereafter in the same paragraph.
Right.
Mature person can also break down and hit back at a person and criticize him. But a Jnani is maintaining his equilibrium in sorrow or in joy.
Mm.
And therefore he is free. Whereas an intelligent person may not be a Jnani to that extent.
So it is not this Gandhian philosophy, if someone slaps you on your cheek, you give them your other cheek. This is not what is meant here, right? For a normal person, not a jnani, a normal person, in order to defend himself, he will have to kind of
I don't think it is he will have to fight back. No, it's not like that. It is like the story of Mahavir, no? When the entire family keeps going day 1, day 2, day 3 to his pravachan, to his sessions. And then the businessman is so angry. The third day when he finds that no food is cooked, he is not there, nobody is at home to offer him tea. He goes there and he curses Mahavir with bad words. The smile on Mahavir's face does not go away. Finally, out of frustration, he spits on him. And then the devotees get up to hit that fellow. But Mahavir does not lose his smile. He is Ahimsa ka pujari. And therefore, that fellow turns back when he stops the devotees from hitting him. He turns back and goes away home. But when he's going home, he feels a lot of paschatap, a lot of things coming up for him. And he realizes that his anger was for the man is really somebody who seems to be enlightened. To him, he had all this thought process. There was a lot of consternation in his mind. Oh, he is such a wonderful person. Even though I spat on him, there was no this thing, anger on his face. He never allowed the devotees. He really must be a great person. And that brought about a transformation. And then he goes next day, he could not sleep the full night. He tosses and turns. Goes the next day back, and then he says, please forgive me. I'm sorry. So then Mahavir says, you will not get forgiveness. The devotees are surprised that why is he saying he will not? Yesterday he didn't allow us to eat. Today he is saying, I will not forgive you. He's saying the person who spat on my face yesterday was somebody different. Today the person standing in front of me needs no forgiveness. He's another person altogether. So Jnani can change you, it can bring about transformation in you, but he is not getting angry.
Yeah. I think here, if you look at how the devotees kind of reacted or responded to versus how Mahavir did, is a stark difference between, see, his devotees are also dharmic people only, right? But then they were upset that this person had spat on Mahavir and they wanted to, and that is legitimate, I guess, right? That is legitimate. Whereas Mahavir
has been teaching ahimsa to the extent that it seems, I am told, I have followed some sessions of his, in which it says he would not even turn sides in the night, change sides, because of he may trample on a insect or an ant or something and kill it. So to that level, he had gone to ahimsa. But that is nididhyasa in practice. And the devotees had not risen to that level of nididhyasa. That is the difference between us mere mortals and the enlightened souls. How much of the knowledge we can put into our day-to-day practice.
And that is why this is considered to be legitimate in human interaction. So when you're dealing with human, I think that is the legitimate criticism. Whereas if you look at how Gurudev responded to all the allegations during the WCF, the Yamuna, and how the reclaimed land was used and how it caused a lot of environmental instability, whatever. There was a lot of criticism. He was even brought up to the way he faced it. For him, it was the same. I mean, that was, of course, a very, it's a situation that produces a lot of dukkha for any normal person. You're being reprimanded and the whole nation, the whole world is looking at you. So that could be a cause of a lot of stress. But the way he responded to it versus how maybe if any one of us was in that situation, how would we respond to it? That hurt will be there, isn't it? There is a jnani, there is no hurt. That is, I think,
For
that
your information, we responded with a lot of calmness. Behind the scenes, there was a lot of things going on. Taxi cabs, rickshawalas were told to block the bridge from which the traffic would be coming to the venue. They were paid to do that. And yet we kept our peace of mind. We did not retaliate. We kept our calmness. There were a lot of things happened. And Gurudev left by example. It even rained, if you remember, during
the first day.
First day. And he refused to change his clothes. All the people down on the stage who were to perform were equally wet and cold. And yet in that cold breeze flowing, they performed. So Prime Minister told him to change his clothes if he wanted to go and change. He said, no, when my devotees are performing in the same condition, why should I? He didn't go to change his clothes. There were a lot of activities to malign this. But he led by example and he told us to keep our calm.
At the same time, he answered properly to the media also, that means wherever the anyaya is happening, you need to respond properly. That's what his message is always. He responded.
That came around when there was a very fiery teacher in our midst who's a very old timer, Manisha Mehta, and she has been handling presses and all that. And she's communication skills are too good. She gave the plan, the roadmap as how to confront them with their lies, not to accept things sitting down. And then we started giving back the proper replies. All the permissions, everything were in place. So behind the scene, a lot of activities went down to nullify the malignment that was going on. It was not passive acceptance, it was active acceptance. We did take proper measures.
Yes.
And also taking this legitimate criticism, hurting a little further. For instance, if your own country is at stake and someone else is like is kind of invading it or causing terrorist activities and all that, your priority there is to protect your countrymen. So then you will take a stand, isn't it? You will fight back. So I think that may also get into this legitimate criticism, legitimate hurting. Because you cannot always take the hurt, sometimes you will hurt back. And this is considered to be legitimate in human interaction. Yeah. I think I don't Dr. Savita, I'm not sure whether this is, because when I was reading it, I did not quite understand it. But Yeah. Does anyone want to share anything else about this shloka?
Protecting our self integrity also, like if you are responding, then is it be called a legitimate hurting?
If you're protecting your integrity, yeah, I think. See, because if you are, for instance, wrongly blamed for something,
Yeah.
then you will have to stand your ground, no?
Yeah, then it will be called legitimate. The respond with legitimately.
And human interaction.
Yeah.
Whereas for a jnani is like above all of this. Yeah. So if no one has anything else to share, we'll close up here today. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat Shri Krishnarpanamastu. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.